Have you ever wondered why China, with 1.4 billion people, still can't match the consumer spending power of the US, which has just 300 million? This overlooked question reveals a lot about how global economies work. Today, I want to explore why China's spending seems stuck in low gear. While America's never slows down, Chinese people are known for being hardworking and ambitious, yet many remain cautious about spending, always preparing for the future. Meanwhile, Americans seem to embrace life and spend freely. Why does one group keep working hard, while the other seems to enjoy the rewards? Welcome to Stewardship Finance Academy, where we help you become a confident investor. Today, I'll challenge the usual narratives about the trade war and global economics with a fresh business-savvy perspective. Let's dive in. Years ago, many immigrants dreamed of earning dollars but spending in RMB, imagining an easy path to prosperity. But living abroad quickly shows it's not that simple. Earning foreign currency is tough, and the excitement fades as reality sets in. One big difference that stands out is spending habits. Chinese people, no matter how much they make, usually save first and spend cautiously, always planning for the future. Americans, on the other hand, tend to spend freely: big houses, cars, and plenty of credit card use, living as if tomorrow will take care of itself. Even as immigrants adapt to Western lifestyles in many ways, their careful approach to spending often remains. This contrast highlights deep cultural values around money. Today I want to ask, who truly enjoys spending more, Chinese people or Americans? And where do they find joy in spending? If you've ever wondered about these differences, stay tuned. I'll help break it down. Let's get started. To understand why consumer spending in China lags, consider this paradox. Despite a population of 1.4 billion and the world's highest savings rate, Chinese households save over 50% of their income. Spending remains cautious. Why? It's not a lack of desire or available products. The real reason is deeper. Limited social safety nets. With uncertain healthcare, education, and retirement security, people feel compelled to save for emergencies and the unknown. Take a typical middle-class family. Xiao Ming and his wife earn 20,000 RMB per month at Foxconn. On paper, they're comfortable. Yet Xiao Ming hesitates to spend half a month's salary on a new iPhone, even if he wants it. Why? He worries about possible hospital bills, job loss, or future education costs for their child. These aren't distant possibilities, they're everyday concerns. This underlying insecurity drives families to save, not spend. The constant what-if makes them hold back, keeping China's consumption lower vein with so many potential shoppers. The Chinese habit of saving is deeply rooted in a culture shaped by generations of hardship. It's really a survival strategy. I remember my grandmother urging me to save for a rainy day, reflecting the belief that financial security is essential when life is uncertain. Many first-generation Chinese immigrants moved to places like the US, Canada, or Australia in search of a stronger safety net, hoping for reliable welfare, healthcare, and education. Yet, when conditions are favorable, Chinese people aren't afraid to spend. The Daigou phenomenon is proof. Chinese shoppers once cleared out Japanese diapers, Australian baby formula, and fueled real estate booms worldwide. When the time is right, their spending power is undeniable. But that golden era has ended. Japanese diapers don't sell out anymore, and in places like Australia, Indian buyers have replaced Chinese investors in real estate. In response, China has tried various tactics to boost spending, sometimes to an extreme. Subsidies are now everywhere. I visited last year. Online stores loudly advertise state subsidies on everything from phones to appliances, and the discounts were real. What's even more striking is the aggressive push for consumer loans. Open any app, and you'll see instant offers for up to 300,000 RMB, even for people like me with no job or savings in China. It almost felt reckless. The collapse of peer-to-peer lending platforms is still fresh in memory. Platforms like Weibei lent recklessly and eventually shut down. Ironically, the government is promoting borrowing to boost spending. They might spike consumption for a while, but simply pull future demand forward. If I buy a phone now because of an incentive, I won't need another next year. The real issue is deeper. Most Chinese people aren't truly consuming, they're surviving. Fear of financial instability and weak social safety nets keep people from spending freely. Until those core insecurities are addressed, genuine consumer spending will remain limited, and China's economic potential will go unrealized. Karl Marx argued in Capital that workers' wages only cover what's needed to keep them working. Pay isn't meant to help you thrive. Just survive. This is clear in the story of Xiao Ming, a Foxconn worker assembling Apple phones he can't afford to buy. His situation exposes a wider imbalance. When China's economy slows and social safety nets are weak, consumption stalls, hurting both people and the economy. But why must so many workers, in China or elsewhere, struggle like this? The real answer lies in the global division of labor. A country's wealth and its people's standard of living was determined long before today's economic issues. Like Saudi Arabia and Australia, built wealth by exporting oil and minerals, enjoying high living standards thanks to natural resources rather than industry. Production powerhouses such as China rely on vast labor forces to manufacture goods for export. Yet, despite their productivity, much of the value they create flows to wealthier countries. At the top are consumption giants like the US. They've shifted away from manufacturing to dominate global trade and finance, leveraging the power of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency to enjoy prosperity and influence. This global division of labor was deliberately built over decades, cementing economic winners and losers. Resource-rich countries gain from geography. Consumption nations draw on historical and financial power. Production-focused countries like China do the heavy lifting for modest returns. This system shapes both national wealth and daily life. For workers like Zhao Ming, it means hard work with little chance for real prosperity. Escaping this role demands not just economic progress, but also challenging the very systems that enforce these roles. The real question isn't just how to climb within this structure, but whether the rules need to change altogether, because as long as the game stays the same, so do the outcomes. In the global division of labor, consumer and resource nations keep relatively fixed roles. Countries like the US dominate through finance and consumption, while places like Saudi Arabia and Australia profit from natural resources. Producer nations, however, shift over time as labor costs and trends change. Japan and the four Asian tigers once led manufacturing, but now China, Vietnam, and India have taken their place with large low-wage workforces. On the surface, this might seem balanced, but it's actually exploitative. Consumer nations like the US print money and lend it to producer countries who use it to buy raw materials and fuel their factories. The finished goods are then sold back to the consumers. The twist: producer nations recycle much of their profits back into consumer economies by buying assets like US Treasuries bond. In the end, producer countries not only supply cheap goods, they also help finance the very economies that consume them, keeping the global hierarchy locked in place. Despite constant labor, their rewards are fleeting, forcing them to keep hustling just to get by. Why accept this? Some have tried to resist. Japan in the 1980s challenged the system, but was hit with the Plaza Accord, which tanked its export economy. Resource nations have questioned the dollar's dominance in oil trade, but pushback is met with political and military pressure. Those warships in the Pacific and Middle East enforce the global order. The familiar result: consumer nations like the US enjoy high living standards, but rack up debt and dependency. Resource nations gain wealth, but risk exhausting their reserves. Producer nations work relentlessly for shrinking returns, what China calls neijun. This is no accident, it's designed into the global system, locking in hierarchy and inequality. Consumer nations reap the most, resource nations trade away their future, and producers end up drained. If nothing changes, the cycle continues. Endless consumption, depleted resources, and overworked producers. The real challenge isn't just resisting the system, but reimagining it, because as long as the rules stay the same, so will the unequal results. The latest wave of Chinese immigrants reflects a new mindset. Unlike earlier generations chasing better welfare or the Western dream, many now are escaping China's exhausting, hyper-competitive environment. Parents send children abroad not for glamour, but to avoid a system where relentless effort brings little payoff. The goal is to find a more favorable competitive niche, moving from producer nations like China to consumer countries such as the US, Australia, or Canada. It's a strategic shift, not just a move. But what does it actually cost to live in these Western countries? In the US and other developed nations, daily life is largely shaped by two major expenses: housing and healthcare. Start with housing. Americans typically spend about 30% of their expenses on shelter. Figure that sounds manageable but only covers rent, not mortgage payments for homeowners. Take Los Angeles. Average rent is about $2,500 a month, just for basic shelter, putting real strain on most people. When a relative considered sending their child to study in Australia and heard rent was 500 AUD per week, they were shocked, especially since that's a low estimate for big cities. Healthcare is the next burden. Americans spend about 20% of their budget on medical care and insurance. The reality: Western healthcare systems put profits first. When illness strikes, people worry about costs and insurance. It's not just recovery, they must navigate a system driven by balance sheets, not well-being. For immigrants from countries like China, where housing and healthcare are more regulated, these constant financial pressures can be a shock. While Western nations promise opportunity, they also demand a steep price financially, emotionally, and psychologically. So, while moving to a consumer country seems like an escape from China's fierce competition, immigrants soon face a new survival, game one with equally high, if not higher, stakes. Not long ago, a shocking incident made headlines. Luigi, wealthy University of Pennsylvania student, shot and killed insurance CEO Thompson. Even more surprising was the flood of social media support for Luigi, exposing the deep frustration Americans feel toward a profit-driven healthcare system. While the violence was inexcusable, it revealed the anger simmering beneath confusing insurance policies and crushing bills. Thompson's death, becoming a symbol of outrage at an unjust system. Another jolt for newcomers. The steep cost of basic services, especially blue-collar labor. Many assume a strong exchange rate means greater purchasing power, only to discover essentials like plumbing are far more expensive than expected. Blue-collar labor in the US is shockingly expensive. Even minor repairs can cost hundreds. I was quoted over $200 just for a plumber's visit to fix a broken office faucet. And after months of waiting, the job was ignored as not worth their time. I ended up buying a new faucet just for the included installation, adding more expense and hassle. This isn't unusual. Basic services like plumbing are often costly and hard to access, a stark contrast to many other countries. For immigrants, the high price of essentials often cancels out the benefit of higher wages, revealing that life in the US can be far more expensive and complicated than expected. There's opportunity here, but it comes at a real price. Food is a daily shock. A basic McDonald's meal runs $15. While Chinese restaurants charge similar prices for single dishes, far from the shared variety of a real Chinese mealware, a typical spread easily tops $50 and rarely tastes like home. No wonder people binge on affordable favorites when back in China. The 7-to-1 exchange rate doesn't match reality. Daily costs feel more like 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. Another reality? Living on credit. Many Americans take on huge student loans, with private college tuition averaging $30,000 a year, over $120,000 for a degree, excluding living expenses. For many, that's more than a house down payment, and the debt can last a lifetime. Student debt shapes American life, forcing many to start adulthood deep in the red and influencing career, family, and housing decisions. It's common for people in their 30s to juggle loan payments, childcare, and home savings, making education a barrier to upward mobility. This reliance on debt extends beyond school cars, homes, even vacations are often financed, fueling an illusion of prosperity that depends on steady income. Despite strong wages and a powerful dollar, high costs and constant debt mean that, for many, the American dream is just keeping up, not getting ahead. For immigrants, America's opportunities come with hidden costs that only surface once you're living here. From food to education to basic services, a dollar doesn't stretch nearly as far as exchange rates suggest. Debt isn't avoidance, a way of life, bringing flexibility, but also long-term financial strain. The real price of life isn't just what things cost, but the sacrifices required to keep up. For those from places like China, where essentials are more affordable, America's greener grass often just means higher expenses. Much of the world thinks Chinese people are wealthy, but it's really a strong savings mindset. In the West, this habit stands out, creating the impression of effortless wealth when, in fact, it's just the power of disciplined saving. It's a striking contrast. China's culture of saving versus America's culture of spending. The ongoing US-China trade war isn't really about tariffs. These are just surface issues. The real challenge is that any country excelling at manufacturing eventually wants to shift to a consumption-driven economy. But success here isn't about size or resources, it's about control over technology. Take Apple. While its products are built in China with parts from Korea and Taiwan, the real power and most profits stay in the US, where design, branding, and strategy are controlled. This is the core of modern global trade. The country that owns the technology and intellectual property takes the biggest share, while those focused on manufacturing earn much less. China is the world's factory and has grown rapidly, but without leading in technology and innovation, it remains a producer in the global supply chain, not the main force behind global consumption. At its core, the US-China rivalry is a fight for technological dominance. For China to become a true consumption-driven economy, it must innovate and develop its own core technologies instead of just manufacturing for others. Ownership of intellectual property, not just production, is key to this transformation. Take Apple. Even as global smartphone sales slow, US consumer spending remains high. That's because, for Americans, electronics make up only a small part of expenses. The real financial burdens are healthcare, education, and housing costs that are unavoidable and take up much of people's income. Skipping a new phone is easy. Skipping a rent or medical bill is not. This explains why Americans spend so much. The system leaves them little choice. Essentials dominate their budgets, limiting room for savings or optional spending. In contrast, China's savings culture gives people more flexibility. For many Americans, however, spending isn't a choice. It's a necessity embedded in their everyday lives. When we look closely at consumption, the gap between China and the United States isn't just about Americans being wealthier. It's the result of a decades-old global economic system. The US built a consumption-driven economy and set the rules after World War II, securing the top spot in trade, finance, and technology. Meanwhile, China, joining later as the world's factory, has relied on hard work and saving, but captured only a small share of profits. For China to become a true consumption-driven powerhouse, it needs more than higher wages or savings. It must move up the value chain by developing its own technology, building global brands, and influencing the global system. This means breaking free from the factory of the world label and leading in innovation, technology, and even culture. It's a long, complex journey that goes beyond domestic reforms. China must redefine its global role. The good news is, progress is happening in areas like renewable energy and e-commerce. But the challenge ahead requires sustained effort and vision. Ultimately, the real battle between China and the US, whether it's tariffs or trade, is a race for technological leadership. If you found this discussion insightful, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more content. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.